Time to learn how to paint realistic birds in watercolour. This will be a complete video tutorial over 5 lessons. Also note that this is one of my older videos from my online school. Now today we'll start with part 1, where we will paint the background and those lovely eyes. Let's get those brushes wet and let's get started. Right, okay, let's make a start on this one. What I'm going to do is use a trace down paper to get this onto the paper, okay? But all I'm going to do this time is just do the outline of the barn owl, because I want to put a basic background in here as well. Now I've cut the paper down to less than A4 size, so this is A4, all the size is A4. So in order to get this onto the paper, if you remember what we did with the trace down paper is literally stick it down, put the trace down underneath and transfer the drawing to the watercolour paper surface. But as I mentioned, we're just going to do the outline this time round. Remember we've got these reference marks to reposition this paper. So then release your tape, which I've got on here. Wet and push then, here. And then you've got the outline for the barn owl. Okay, the next stage is masking fluid. Now I tend to use blue mask, which is the artist one. This is one that I tend to use on a regular basis because I can see where I put it. Because it's blue, you know where it is. Whereas you get the transparent masking fluid and you think, where did I put that? So you can use a ruling pen, you can use cocktail sticks, you can use all sorts of ideas to get the outline on the paper with the masking fluid. Okay, so that's the start of the barn owl, believe it or not. Now we're going to let that dry. Once that is dry, we can start mixing the paint for the background colours. Right, so the masking fluid feels tacky to touch. So that's ready to go. That's all tacky there. Obviously the thicker the masking fluid, the longer it takes to dry. So the next stage is to wet all this background out. So I'm going to get some clean water. Okay, and I'm going to soak the paper. Not go inside the barn owl, obviously. So the masking fluid will preserve the edge of the barn owl for us. So just get a nice kind of sharp line to kind of work with when we start on the portrait. So make sure it's soaked quite well, but you need to go over this probably 2 or 3 times because it's going to soak into the paper very quickly initially. But it also depends on how warm it is where you are. So if it's obviously really warm, it's going to dry very quickly indeed. It's usually around the corners it dries first. Okay. So we're going to start off with the light colour first, which is the orange and yellow. You have to remember this will dry a lot lighter, okay? So sometimes you have to compensate for that, but I do not want a dark background on this bird, or a very bright coloured background. So this is just initial before we put the greens and the browns. Obviously the brown will dullen it down a little bit as well, which you want it to do. Just a little bit in there. And then I'm going to go into the raw sienna. That's the next colour to drop in. It's quite weak as well, a very weak wash. Just to dab around using the side of the brush as we go. You can see all that on the screen. Just the side, barely touching the paper. Keep working your way around and try to keep all areas nice and wet, okay? So if you've not been up there for a while, go back up there, just add a bit more colour in there, just to kind of wet it a little bit. Try and keep it moving, try and keep it wet. Then I'm going to go into the burnt sienna. Now this is going to be quite strong in places, so you might have to dampen this down a little bit. Again, barely touching the paper, just dabbing a few here and there, not covering everywhere up. A little bit more. A bit more. I'm being too gentle with it, but I'd rather be too gentle than too heavy with the colour. Okay. A little bit more. So this is a gap in there, look. And again, I'm not covering every single space, I'm leaving gaps here and there. Barely touching the paper. Using the side of the brush. Okay. I'm going to rinse the brush out a little bit. And then you can squeeze the brush out as well, like we've done before. I go into the sap green. Now the sap green will really kind of make the background colourful. Sometimes I may even add just a little bit of burnt umber in there. I don't know yet. I don't like to have too many colours, as I said earlier on, in the background. They can get too fussy, too confusing. Because somebody asked me on Facebook, how do you do your mottled backgrounds? Well, this is the way I do them. Okay, do them all the same way, just using different colours as I go along. But as I say, try to stick to no more than probably 3, maybe 4 colours in max. I mean, I've got 4 colours here, and that's all I want to use on this one. And I think that is probably plenty. Otherwise it becomes very, very confusing, far too colourful background, which you don't want anyway. Okay, so that is about it. So what I want to do, I'm just going to wash the brush out a little bit, and whilst it's nice and wet, just gently tickle over the top of this, just to soften it in places. I don't want too many hard patches of colour, just to soften it down. So it's a nice kind of gradual fade from colour to colour, if you know what I mean. And that should, hopefully, about do for the background. So I'll let that dry now. Now this has got to dry at least a couple of hours before you even attempt to take the masking fluid off. Don't dry it with a hairdryer, because what will happen then, the paint will go underneath the masking fluid, and it will harden the masking fluid. So when you try taking the masking fluid off, it will tear the paper. Okay, so let it dry in natural room temperature just for a couple of hours or so until it's nice and dry. You should be able to look at it from the side and it shouldn't be warped, especially if you stretch the paper as well. Okay, it should hopefully dry nice and flat. So we'll see you in a couple of hours and see how well it's kind of dried out. Talk to you soon. First thing you want to do, alright, is get a bit of tissue paper, I use kitchen roll, and dry the tips of your fingers off. Okay, just dry the tips of your fingers off a little bit first. Now with the masking fluid, all I do is roll it with your clean finger away from the background. Okay, so you see what I mean when it starts coming into camera shot here. So kind of away from the background, just roll it. Some people have masking fluid erasers aiming towards the inside of the image. As we go. Right, and there we go. Let's make sure you get any remnants off there. Have a little last minute check. Just feel with your finger, with your dry fingers, a little bit there, a little bit still there. Just make sure you've not missed any tiny bits here and there. And then you're ready to kind of transfer the drawing back on top of the paper. So let's do that next. So what I'm going to do is reposition my printout onto the paper, matching up those reference marks where they were. I'll just zoom in a little bit for you. You will see my little reference marks here, look, are nicely in line. You can just about make them out on the blue masking tape here. So, right, so the next stage is to transfer all the detail from your photograph onto the paper. So I'll crack on and do that. And remember, I've done a little tutorial on using transfer paper, or trace down paper, whatever you want to call that.
Also, don't forget to click on that subscribe button down below, and don't forget that bell icon as well, just so you'll never miss one of my YouTube videos.
But this method's pretty quick. Let's take it off. And that's all transferred on, ready to get to the painting process. First of all, we'll go for burnt umber, okay? Some lamp black paint and a little bit probably of burnt sienna as well for inside the eye. Right, first things first, piece of paper to protect the paper from your hand. Right, I'm going to use a size 000 brush, and all I'm going to do first, without knocking the camera, is drop a little bit of water in the eye. Okay, I'm going to miss the highlight area for now. So it's coming around the highlight area, a little bit of water in there. And I'm going to come over towards a bit of a highlight on the side of the eye as well. Okay, let the water soak in just for a minute. Give it a chance to work for you. Okay. The first colour I'm going to drop into that is going to be the burnt sienna. Okay, just to drop it into the eye. We need a bit of warmth behind to begin with. And this is going to act as a basic layer, a bit of a foundation if you know what I mean. So if you put makeup on, which I don't, if you put makeup on, it's a foundation to the makeup, it's a foundation to the painting. So this is going to be the building blocks, the very start of it. Okay, just to begin with. So that's just the first layer. Always start off very light and then get darker as you go along, okay? We'll do the same again on the other eye, just while that one's drying. So we're going to wet that one. Again, missing the highlight. This is just the first layer for the eyes. And as per usual, we'll gradually build this layer up as we go along, just by adding more colour, getting darker and darker as we go. Back into the burnt sienna and pop that in all the way around. Again, skipping the highlight. I mean, the highlight's got a little bit of a kind of cerulean blue in there, really. It's got a little bit of kind of blue shine to it. So we'll pop some in there as and when this is all nice and dry. Or once we've got this section done anyway. Okay. So that's kind of both eyes initially. Just put a little bit more in that one. Probably about the same kind of colour for the two. Just for the first layer in the eyes. Right. Okay, so that'll do to begin with. We'll let that dry and then we'll come back into the eyes in a minute. So a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna, and then a little bit of burnt umber. Drop that in. Okay, and effectively what you'll have is my test paper again, look. There's a little bit of colour like this. There we go. And that's going to be the kind of shadow around the outside of the eyes. So what we want to do is wet around this area, around the outside of the eye. Not all the way around, it's not going to have a big ring around its eye. So just wear that area and then bring it down where it's got this kind of browny colour to it, which is a colour we just mixed, or thereabouts. Again, it's the first layer. Just wet it, only goes to about here on this one, and there's a little bit I've just noticed around this area here, only a kind of highlighted area, just very fine, very light. Okay, re-wet if it's drying too quick for you, which it is on mine at the moment. Okay, go into your colour that you've got and very lightly just touch that colour in. This will do for the undertones. I think there was a group called that, wasn't there? So this will do for the basic first layer again of the shadow or the colour that's under there. And again, around here, just to kind of give a hint, just a hint of detail there, underneath all the detail we're going to put over the top. Soften this out a little bit, because that's a bit lighter on the top there. Then we'll do the same again down here. This will be darker this side as in the photo, so bear that in mind. Okay, and again drop in the colour that you've made. A bit too much, Paul. You can always lift it off, dry your brush on your kitchen roll and just lift it off a little bit. That was a bit too much, Paul. And then lightly fill that in. Okay. Again, these are just the initial washes that we're going to put underneath, and we're going to be building on the top of these as we go along. I just wanted to soften this edge out, it's a bit too sharp on that edge, so I'm going to get a line of water. If you remember showing you this one before with the robin, just a line of water away from that colour, then little circles, just tickle them in. I'd say this is real time, so it will be edited just a little bit, but not much. So there will be occasions where you think, oh, The idea of this is that you will see me painting in real time and hopefully feel that you're with me as well. That's my intention. Okay, and we'll do the same again on the top of the eye, just on the side there. Just to kind of get a little bit of a highlight in there, just a little bit, not much. Just wet that area down. Wet it further than you need to, and then pop that colour in just a little bit. That's probably all we need. In fact, I'm going to soften that out on the edge with a damp clean brush. Right, okay, so I've zoomed in a little bit for you. So the next stage really is to work on the eyes. So let's get some detail in those eyes for you. So if I zoom in a little bit, you'll be able to see a bit more, won't you? So, okay. So again, I'm going to wet the inside of these eyes just a little bit. And we're going to go in with a slightly different colour now. I'll do the same on the other one because there's just going to be one quick layer on here as I go along. So burnt sienna and burnt umber this time. And we're going to drop that colour in. Burnt sienna, burnt umber. You'll see the reason behind having this lighter shade underneath once it all comes to nearly finishing the eyes. You'll see why that is. I have a method in my madness, I promise you. So that's going to come down and around. Keep looking at your reference photo. Make sure that things are still in proportion. It's the right kind of curve, right kind of shape. Because this eye does go in a little bit, but it also comes down around here as well. With an extra kind of eyelid, if you wish, an extra crease around here. So you want to kind of get that form going, which is there. Okay, while the other side's wet, let's pop a colour in there as well. Hopefully it's still wet enough. And the same again, just to kind of stop it being too dark. I don't want it too dark just yet. It's going to go very dark eventually, this, as I said. So, but I just want to work it in layers as we go along. And then drop in the next colour. So it's the same colour again. Looks darker now, doesn't it? I think it's gone thicker on my palette. But it doesn't matter because it's going to get even darker than this. And again, we're going to bring this around, looking at the shape of the eye. So keep looking at the photo, backward and forward of your eyes. So important. And then that'll do for that shape there. Okay. And I think while this is still a little bit damp, I'm going to put an extra layer on this one as well. So they roughly look about the same. Right, okay, so back to the eye. Is there? It says more than one. Oh dear. What I'm going to get is a little bit of cerulean blue. I'm not bothered putting it in my palette. And I'm going to dab this in to the highlighted areas just before we go dark on the picture. So just dab this in, and then using a clean damp brush, soften it down into that highlighted area. Okay, a little bit of blue. And then on top of that, while it's damp, a little bit of French ultramarine. So that's cerulean blue. And I'm going to a little bit of French ultramarine as well, just to add to the corners as we go along. We'll get more detail in these highlights as we go, but I just want to kind of get this in for the early stages. Then we'll do the same on the other one. Wash your brush out. And the same again applies to this side. So I'm going to put a little bit in initially, and then with a damp clean brush to soften that down just a little bit. Right, okay, so what we need to do now is look at these eyes and start to get some more detail in there. Right, so let's go in for the lamp black, and there's a little bit of burnt umber in there as well. And we need to kind of get some detail in these eyes now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is very carefully work out an outline for these eyes, where the edge of the eye goes. So I kind of pick that in, and that comes to about there. Just working out as I go along, looking at the angles that these lines go. This is nearly horizontal, this part, and then kind of curves around as we go. If we miss something, we can always take some paint off to put up a little highlight here and there as well, which is probably what I'll do anyway with this one. So kind of work it around as we go. And once you've got that far, we'll fill that area in. Beautiful birds, they really are. That cuts into there. Again, looking back and forth at your reference photo as you go along. And the same here. Got quite a lot of paint on my brush, just so I can fill it in. We'll soften this down as we go along anyway. I want to get this edge for the highlight softer than that. And I think what I might do, because we've got a highlight coming down the side here of the eye, which you'll see on the reference photo. Get that painted in. And then wash out the brush so there's hardly any water on there, and just soften down this edge. Do the same again, wash your brush, soften this edge down, a little bit darker in this area here, so I just want to darken that down a little bit more. Soften it down. Then we'll go to the highlight area. Make sure you haven't got any water on the metal ferrule there, by the way, because as I've said many times in the past, it can be a pain because it just blobs onto the painting just when you don't want it to do it, and you think, oh no, not again. Just have a habit of doing that. So what I'm doing, I'm just kind of very lightly touching the paper around the edge of this black area. It needs to be darker yet again, so it's not quite dark enough there. Just kind of soften that edge up just a little bit, not too much. And I'm going to go in there with a little bit of French ultramarine, straight from the pan, straight from the colours I've got. Just to dab that in. And the same on the top. Then back into your black again, which is blacky blue. It's a little bit thin, my black at the moment, so I'm going to add a little bit more to the mix. And again, we'll come back in here and add that colour. See, black can be quite bland on its own, can't it? So you need to make sure you add a little bit of colour to it. Be it a little bit of burnt umber or alizarin crimson if you want a warmer black. So you can do it that way around. And again, I'm bringing this down. Just want to get this edge quite tidy. I know we've got some hairs going over there, some feathers, which will be going over the top of that. And again, there's a bit of a highlight around this edge of this eyeball here, so I just want to kind of bring that around. And as before, I'll soften that down as we go. So this is still looking a bit light. Now I've gone darker with the black, it's still looking a bit on the light side. So again, soften this edge down that little bit. I'm going to come into here and soften that. Got a few more details to drop into there as well. But that is starting to come together, as you can see now. So when it starts to come to life, you think, you can see why I tend to do the eyes first. And just soften this down a bit more. It's a bit darker down here compared to here. And this bit of a highlight. Just zoom into that a little bit more here, I think, just so you can see what I'm doing. Hopefully it's still in focus. So yeah, so I just want to soften that down a little bit more down there. Okay, remember to use a piece of paper, put your hand on, just protect your paper. And then what I want to do is work out where the outside of this eye goes. So we've got like an inner black area here, which is this bit. Again, I keep looking at the photo backward and forward, just so you can see where things go. It's quite a thick, quite wide area down here, then goes to a thin line as it goes around the corner. And then we've got another piece which tapers off from here, which it does. And that goes all the way over the top of the eye. Well, it's about here roughly. This will be softened down as we go. And this is the bottom of the eye, which will be a bit browner as we go. So I'm going to just kind of mark it in with a nearly dry brush at the moment, just so I can see where things go. And then that will go to about here. Then we've got a piece that comes out. So my brush is just about dry. Put a little bit of paint on there, Paul. And that's going to, you can see the bristles starting to spray apart now. That's how dry I'm working this, just so I can get some marks in there so I can see where things are. You know, because you kind of plan and map out where you want to go with your paint first. Then we know this comes down to here. Right, so we'll get a little bit of browny colour, and this is going to be a little bit of yellow ochre, burnt umber and burnt sienna. So yellow ochre, burnt umber, burnt sienna, and that's going to go down here and kind of drop into the bottom of this eye, just to soften this little line I've made so far. And again, this is just the first layer of kind of wash in there, just so we've got something to work on the top of. The same would apply to underneath this eye, to the eyelid there, and just drop that into the same area. And remember I said about this line here, we're just going to soften that down, just a clean damp brush, just to tickle it in, soften it down as we go. And this will give you an idea, no pun intended, how I do just the one eye. And I'm going to go a little bit of black, and I just want to put in a few marks here and there, just to suggest where some of these details go within this eye. Okay, then let's start working on where some of these creases, little gaps, little cuts. We need to add a little bit of browny red into this as we go along, but just start working out where some of these little bumps and cuts go. You don't have to be too precise on this part, I just want to kind of suggest where they all are, which is what I'm working on. And then this will open up, and then again this will get darker, a little bit of lamp black, just to kind of darken the underside of this top eyelid. Might put a little bit of browny colour in there as well. This is a bit of burnt umber, just to add to the mix. As we go, and then working on where these little marks go for the top of the eyelid. You can see why I use a 00 brush, because it's you need that detail in there. As I mentioned, this is a Winsor & Newton Cotman Series 111, size 00, and the other one I do use is the Rosemary & Co, which is quite good. So Rosemary & Co, and that's the spotter brushes. I know other artists use them as well. I'm just going around this with a little bit of burnt umber and burnt sienna mix. Get a bit of warmth in there now as we go. Okay, just looking at these little circle marks, little curls that's in here. That's all I'm working on. And I think once we've got this done, we'll let it dry, and we're just touching any kind of fine lines or marks we need to put in there, because I just noticed that this needs to be softer in there as well. But as you can see, that eye is nearly done. And it's taking a little bit of time, but that's what we've got. So I always say to you, just make sure you've got plenty of time to sit and paint. You know, turn the radio off, or you can have the radio on if you want to. But it depends if you want to listen to me or not. I haven't exactly got dulcet tones, so you can see this highlight's really standing out now, because obviously the darker that we've gone, the highlight will really kind of stand out for you. Right, so what I want to do again is wash the brush out, and then again soften this line down a little bit more, just to get it a bit softer. This blocking foot paper is really handy for kind of layering and softening. And I've just noticed there's like a little highlight mark here, barely visible, but we can make it. So what we need to do, a damp clean brush, just go over the area, just a few times, just tap it, tap it, tap it. And then with your tissue, lift it off, okay? And again, lift it off. And that's a little highlight mark that's in there as well. So it's going to put a few more little touches of detail in here as we go along. Just a few. Don't overdo it. Don't try and outline everywhere that you see. Just put a little marks here and there, which kind of helps to kind of separate some of these areas as we go along. And the same applies underneath here as well. Just a few little marks, just to show there's little cuts and gaps. And I think underneath there, just a few marks. And I'm just checking to see we've got 1, 2, 3 sections. So you've got this section, the central line section, then you've got the highlight section there as well. Just to make sure everything's as it should be. And I think that's not far from done, apart from we need a little bit of kind of burnt umber in there, I think. So it's going to give a bit of burnt umber a minute, straight from the half pan, straight from my palette of colour. So if you can't see it on the other camera, I'll just show you on here. So this is the burnt umber I'm using. And that is going to go just a touch. Again, not everywhere, just little places here and there, that's all I'm doing. I'm going to just drop that into my mixing palette now. I want to bring this line down further. And this is slightly duller down there now in that corner. Bring it down further, and I think what we'll do, we'll leave that eye now and go to the next one. Okay, because all this area down here around the eye will get worked on after we've done the second eye. So eye number 2.
Hi, my name is Paul Hopkinson. So what I do, I show you my technique on how to paint wildlife in watercolour. We go through a variety of subjects from dogs, cats, insects and even botanical subjects as well. And I'll guide you through this right from the beginning all the way through to the end for those final brush strokes. You'll also find that with most of my videos you also get the outline drawing and that reference photograph as well. Every month we produce a PDF version, so a typed out version with photographs of that monthly main video. You'll get the PDFs for the months that you are a member. Now this is a very in-depth document with lots and lots of pages of information and instruction, as well as obviously the photographs as well. Now another benefit is that you get access as well to my private Facebook group. Now the good thing about my videos is that they'll be here 24/7. So you can watch them 6 months down the line, 2 years down the line, it doesn't really matter. They'll always be there. You can stop, you can play, you can rewind, you can pause as many times as you want to do so. So that will give us some ideas on what you'll gain from being a member on my Patreon channel.
I think what I might do is just kind of carefully outline just in that little bit of burnt umber I had earlier on, just so I can see where things go. Let's start mapping where things are before you start winning with the dark colours, okay? So I'm just looking at the shape of the eye, constantly looking at the reference photo obviously, which is something I keep saying, don't forget to look at the photo, and work out where things go. Alright, so again, a little bit of burnt umber, that's all I'm using, just initially. You could use lamp black if you want to, but just don't have it too thick. Doesn't really matter what colour you use, as long as it's not too dark or too thick. That's where the top eyelid goes to there. But I think that actually cuts in lower than that, which is about here. And that comes around. Oh, I'm running out of burnt umber. And then we've got, this is I think where the highlight comes. You know, we've got the highlight in the other one. We've got a highlight to here. I think it's about that area there. Then we've got a bit of a crease where the edge of the eye goes to here. It's like a little white area, or off-white, which comes to here. So I'm just keep looking back and forth at the photograph, and I keep saying it, but that's what I'm just saying what I'm doing. Then this is like a white area in here, or whitish. That kind of curls around. This is more or less horizontal, a bit like this area here. It's kind of horizontal. And then these two lines will join together. That's all I'm looking at all the time on that. And we've got a bit of a gap there as well. All this area is just all feathers, which will be added in as we go along. Okay, so what I'm going to do first again is wet the area inside there first. Just dampen it down, get it a little bit soft, so it's nice and kind of damp and soft in there. And just kind of wet it as we go around the highlight. Right, so that's softened down a little bit. Then we'll go into our lamp black, which has got a little bit of burnt umber in there, and we'll just drop this in. We went straight in with the colour last time round, but I think we'll just kind of do it as a softer way this time round. Let it work for you, and that comes down to like a little mini V on the top of this eye. And it's completely pitch black up there on the photo. And then work it down, looking at the shapes, especially for this highlight as well, because this kind of comes down like a curve, so down and up a little bit on there, and down, a bit more black, browny black, bring it around, and then following that line down, looking at your reference photo, see where it stops. And we've got these reference marks in there already, which is a big help. And that comes down to here. And it's going to outline this little line down here now, because this is a bit of a highlight in there. So that's starting to come together already. I love it when you see the life starting to shine in the eyes. You know, that really makes a big difference, and then you've got something to look at when you do the rest of the painting. You really have. So going back in with a thicker black now. This is just pure lamp black. Sticking with my 00 brush. You could do this with a larger brush, as long as you've got a good point on the brush. Just kind of tickle that in. Again, I'm going to come down to see where that highlight goes. It's barely visible, this highlight on this side. It's not as intense, it's not as bright as that one. So you have to kind of replicate that, because both eyes will not be the same. They'll not be the same, because one is slightly more in shadow than the other. So I'm going to outline this part down here initially. This more or less joins together there. I'm going to wash the brush out, and then I'm going to come in and soften this section down here, just so it's barely visible, like so. Okay, and then I think what we need to do is soften down. We'll get a little bit of blue first. I'm going to get a bit of French ultramarine and tap that in. Bit more pull. Virtually a dry brush that was then. So we're going to tap that into the highlight. Not all over, just in places. Just to tap it around. Look at the shapes and the highlights in there. and wash the brush out. And then what we'll do is, again as before, just soften down this black edge for the highlight. Just make it a little bit softer. Go around it, soften it down, and into the highlight a little bit. Because this highlight is not quite as bright as the other side, because again it's the side of the face is slightly in shadow. I'm just dragging a bit of black into there, just by tapping. That's all I'm doing. Tippy tap tap. Just to soften it, like so. Just get rid of that little bit of there. It's quite a dark part of the eye, that, isn't it? It really is. Then with a damp clean brush, I'm going to soften down, a bit more water on there I think, soften down this section here, just to soften it. And I think that needs to be brought underneath, so a little bit of browny black, so burnt umber and lamp black, so brought underneath there. Right, we'll let this dry and I'll work on the rest of the details for that eye. Alright, so I'll see you in a minute. So we're going to go into some lamp black, burnt umber, and I might put in a little bit of kind of burnt sienna in there as well, so just to warm it a little bit. So lamp black, burnt umber and burnt sienna. And I'm just going to kind of put some little details in here where we've got this reference line. Remember, these are little curls really. Tiny curls like that, so they're not straight. So little curls you put in, little half circles as we go along. Just not too evenly, a few lines in between. So little curls, little half circles and a few lines in between. Okay, and then this upper eyelid, the same will apply to that. This one needs to be darker on some of these creases as we go along. When you look at the photo, you can see that on the photo. These are quite dark in there. I think the thing with painting as well is learning how to kind of look at the photo, how to kind of see things with more detail. And when you start to kind of study things like this, you do tend to see more detail in there. And you wonder why you missed it in the first place. Okay, so now that life is coming into that eye now, it's starting to, isn't it? So I'm going to go back with more black again. So this is just pure lamp black now. Straight into the top of the eye. And I think, again, I'm thinking about shape. We need that curl in there. I need that to be really black in there. Really black. And before we come to this highlighted area here, I'll do the same again. I'll wash the brush out and I'll just dampen this area down that a little bit. A bit more water on there, not too much, a bit too much on there. Just dampen it down. Go back into your black again and touch that into the paper. I spend so much time just doing the eyes, which obviously, as you can see, that's what you can see the reasons behind that, because you want to get the life into that animal. Okay, so far so good. So I'm going to go for a little bit of burnt sienna and burnt umber, and just tap a bit more of that into this area here. We need to darken this slightly. I think we'll just put a little bit on the other side as well, just to tap around. Leaving gaps here and there as we go. Just get that a little bit darker. Okay, and a little bit of lamp black now and burnt umber, and then it just kind of tapers away down this way, like so. Okay, as for this area down here, looking at the shape, that kind of pulls out Right, so okay, now those eyes have dried, we need to kind of look at any kind of highlights you want to put in there as well. Alright, so I want to look around this area here. It needs to be highlighted slightly. Probably a couple little hints of highlight within this highlighted area as well. Don't want to put too much in because this, as I mentioned, this is a bit more in the shade on this side. So you don't want too much in, but you need a little bit, even if it's not in the photo, just kind of bring a little bit of life in there. So all I've got is a little bit of watercolour white. That's basically all I'm using. Mixing that to like a creamy consistency. So watercolour white, make it into a creamy consistency. And then, very gently, remember you can tint this down if need be. Barely touching the paper. Bring that line down and we'll tint it down afterwards if it's too bright, okay? And the same again for the highlight, just going to bring it, kind of form where things go, into there. As I mentioned, we don't want too much on this side really. Just a little bit here and there, just to show the shape and the form. Trying to think, maybe I need a little bit more dark area in there as well. Okay, it's kind of analysing and re-looking at things as you go along. And I think this side also, just a little bit, get a bit more paint. Just on that side here, just as a highlight. This is quite bright here anyway, but I'm just going to soften it in places. A few tap marks here and there. And I think that's probably all we need on the white. And I think what I'm going to do now, that highlight which is on this side, I'm going to get a little bit of lamp black, but very watery. And barely touching the paint. All I want to do, just soften that down a little bit, just by tapping. Tap it onto the paint, just kind of knocks it back a little bit as you can see on there. So there you go. So that more or less is it for the main eyes itself, to give us some ideas. So now I'm going to get a little bit of burnt umber, a little bit of burnt sienna. Work out where some of these marks go. So, okay, so we need to kind of get some of these details in here now. So burnt sienna, burnt umber, and tap some of these marks in. This will kind of bring that colour in now, which is what we want. Just to kind of look at the direction that these go in on the photo and bring them into shot, bring them into play. Because after this we'll work on the beak. Then once the beak is done, we can then think about doing the white areas. And how do we do that? Well, we have to put a layer of colour down first, and then you build on the top using watercolour white. I mean, the thing with the barn owl painting, we do use a lot of watercolour white. You know, if you haven't got watercolour white, you can use gouache, or gouache, depends how you pronounce it. This is very similar, it's all water based. You can use acrylic white as well, which I use occasionally for some of my paintings. And that works quite well actually, but it's just obviously it's a more permanent fixture, so you put the acrylic down and before you know it, you know, you've got it down, you can't get it off again. So once it's on, it's on. Okay, so kind of just softening this out a little bit. I don't want it too harsh. Just looking at the photo where these go. And the same down here, just to soften them down. And then we'll do the same on the other side here as well. So using that same mix of, what was it? Burnt sienna and burnt umber. Okay, so again I'm looking at the direction that these go in. These are a bit darker on this side, but I think I'm going to get this initial colour in first and then we can kind of reassess it. So we can say, actually, I'll put a bit more burnt umber with that, or even a touch of lamp black, if I want to, but I mean only a touch of lamp black, because it can then deaden the colour if you're not careful. So looking at where these go, I've already got some pencil marks underneath there which are barely visible, just as reference marks, so I know where these lines go and the direction in which they go in, which is why it's so important for the drawing out stage, kind of get as much detail on there as you can, and then just soften it down with your putty rubber before you start painting, so you can just see that detail underneath there. Okay, so we've got a few more on this side as well. Again, I'll kind of swing those out. Just a few. There's not as many on this side as the other side actually, but okay. And again, clean damp brush, soften it down, a bit more water. Just soften it back a little bit. And we'll do the same on the area we just painted. This needs to be a bit darker around there, I just noticed. So we can do that. So that's that area softened there as well. Just tickle in little circles I'm making there at the moment. I'm going to go up a little bit of burnt umber and lamp black. Not too much. Put a few lines in there just to show that it's darker inside. And that, I think, is about it for the eyes.
Right, so join me in part 2 where we will work on the beak and start to work on those layers of feathers on the face. I'll see you there.